I hired the private investigator for what I called peace of mind. That's what you say when the ground beneath your feet has turned to mist, and you need someone with facts to tell you whether you're standing or falling. It sounds rational. It wasn't. It was the last desperate act of a woman who had been quietly disappearing for a decade. The vanishing wasn't dramatic. It was the slow erosion of a coastline, a look not held across the dinner table, a birthday card signed with just his name, Robert, instead of All My Love, Robert. Weekends that stretched into business trips in a city only 3 hours away, from which he'd return smelling of unfamiliar soap. The careful way he'd angle his phone screen away from me, a gesture so practiced it was now subconscious. Our children, both grown and living states away, had become his conduit for news I should have heard first. "Dad told me about the roof repair, Mom. You okay with the contractor?" my daughter would ask. Or, "Dad mentioned you were thinking of downsizing." He was narrating my life to them, editing me out of my own story, making my concerns sound like the vague worrings of a fading woman. The tipping point was a Tuesday. Robert was in Cleveland, again. I was pruning the rose bushes he'd planted for our 30th anniversary, now overgrown. My shears hit something hard and metallic buried in the roots. I dug with my gloved hands and pulled out a small, locked strongbox crusted with dirt. It wasn't ours. I didn't have the key. That night, when I asked him about it on the phone, his voice didn't flicker with surprise. It went flat, cold. "Don't touch things that aren't yours, Eleanor. It's just some old paperwork. I'll deal with it when I'm home." Shook. He'd never spoken to me like that, like a subordinate, like a nuisance. The box sat on the kitchen counter for 2 days, a silent accusation. When he returned, it was gone. He never mentioned it again. And I knew with a certainty that settled in my bones like winter, that my marriage, the entire architecture of my life, was a carefully maintained facade. I was living in someone else's set design. I found Martin Finch through a discreet ad in the back of a literary magazine. His office smelled of coffee and old paper. He was in his 60s, with kind eyes that didn't pretend to pity me. "Peace of mind," I told him, my hands steady in my lap. "I think my husband is having an affair. I need to know, for my own clarity." He nodded, taking notes. "Clarity is a good goal, Mrs. Albright." I gave him the facts. Robert's travel schedule, the unfamiliar credit card charges for hotels I'd never visited, the second phone I'd glimpsed in his briefcase, the way our joint accounts had been slowly drained over 5 years into investments I couldn't access. "He says it's for our retirement security," I explained, "that he's handling it." "And the children?" Martin asked, his pen poised. "They think I'm anxious, that their father is just a busy man. They tell me to take up a hobby." I smiled, a thin, brittle thing. "I think my hobby is now discovering who I've been married to." For 3 weeks, life continued in its pantomime. Robert was solicitous, bringing me tea, asking about my garden. It was a performance, and I was his audience of one. I played my part, the slightly forgetful, contented wife. Inside, I was a vault, waiting for Martin's combination. His call came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. His voice was professional, but with a new weight. "Mrs. Albright, I have a preliminary report. It's comprehensive. I strongly recommend we meet in person." We met in a quiet corner of a public library, not his office. He placed a plain manila folder between us. He didn't open it immediately.
"The affair," he began, his voice low. "It's more than that. The woman's name is Lisa. She's 48. She lives in Cleveland in a house owned by a trust. She has 2 children, a boy, 16, and a girl, 14. My heart was a dull drum. The numbers did their terrible math. 16, 14. Robert's critical projects in Cleveland began 17 years ago. "I'm so sorry," Martin said, watching my face. But he wasn't finished. In the course of verifying her identity and circumstances, I pursued the property records. The trust that owns the home is in your husband's name, as are the accounts funding their private school tuition, their vehicles, their lives. He paused. Their birth certificates list the father as Robert Albright. The air left the room. I was a sculpture of ice. 2 children, a whole hidden family, a parallel universe running alongside my own, funded by the life we'd built. There's more, Martin said, and now his voice held something else. Not pity, but a sharp, focused intensity. He opened the folder. He slid a photocopied document toward me. It was a marriage license from the state of Nevada, dated 1998. The groom, Robert James Albright. The bride, Lisa Ann Parter. The world narrowed to the grain of the library table under my fingertips. 1998, the year my mother died. The year Robert held me at the funeral, whispering, "I'll always be here, Ellie." The year he took a solo fishing trip to grieve in his own way. It appears, Martin Finch said, choosing each word with the care of a bomb disposal expert, that your husband is a bigamist. The Nevada license was filed. There is no record of its dissolution. I stared at the document. The signature, his signature. I knew every loop and dash of it from 1,000 birthday cards, mortgage papers, love notes that now felt like forgeries. Legally, Martin continued, his gaze steady on mine, this changes everything. The bigamy invalidates the later marriage, yours, from its inception. But more pressingly, under the laws of our state and considering the fraudulent dissipation of marital assets to support this other family, Mrs. Albright, the financial implications are substantial. I couldn't speak. I could only stare. He leaned forward, the kindness in his eyes now mixed with the fire of a man who has just seen injustice quantified. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you just became a very rich woman." The words hung in the quiet library air. They didn't feel like a victory. They felt like a sentence, a verdict on a 35-year life that had never existed. I left the library with the folder in my bag. The rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and shining. I sat in my car, the key not yet in the ignition, and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Who was this woman? Not a wife, not legally even a widow to a living man. What was I? I was the sole beneficiary of a catastrophic truth, and I had no idea what to do with the inheritance. I did not go home. I drove to the botanical gardens, a place Robert had always found tedious. I walked the empty, rain-drenched paths, the folder on lead weight in my tote bag. The facts, now physical, began their slow, corrosive work. A wife? Children? A marriage? The word bigamy was so archaic, so theatrical. It belonged in black and white movies, not in my sensible beige sedan. Yet it explained everything. The emotional distance wasn't just neglect, it was a necessary division of resources. The separate finances weren't just control, they were a logistical firewall. My anxiety was the intuitive understanding of a creature whose habitat is a lie. I thought of the strongbox in the roses. What old paperwork was so vital it needed burying? A duplicate marriage certificate? Proof of the other children's paternity? I remembered a vacation to Reno in 1997. Robert had won a sales award. We'd seen the glittering chapels, laughed at the idea of an impulse wedding. Had he gone back? Alone? The next year? Under the cover of grief? The pieces clicked into a monstrous picture. He hadn't just cheated, he had built a trap. By marrying her first, any marriage to me was void. In the eyes of the law, I was a mistress, a long-term cohabitant with no automatic claim to the assets accumulated in his name after 1998. He had financially planned for 2 families, positioning me as the unwitting, unfunded branch. The peace of mind I'd sought was now a depth charge exploding the seabed of my past. Every memory required re-examination. The late nights at the office, the golf weekends, the way he'd discouraged me from pursuing my own career after the children left, saying, "Why stress? I'll provide." He hadn't been protecting me, he'd been containing me. I hired a lawyer, not a divorce attorney, a civil litigator named Amanda Cross, who specialized in complex fraud. I met her in a sleek, quiet office. I laid out Martin Finch's report without crying. The tears, I found, had been burned away by a cold, clear fury. Amanda scanned the documents, her expression neutral. "This is fraud on a breathtaking scale," she said finally. "The bigamy is a criminal matter, but the civil fraud is where your power lies. He has been using jointly earned assets, or assets that would be considered marital in a valid marriage, to fund a secret family for decades. He has committed constructive fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." The legal terms were a new language, but I understood their meaning. Weapons. "What do you want, Eleanor?" Amanda asked, setting the papers down. I looked out her window at the city skyline. I thought of the house I'd made a home, the gardens I'd tended, the retirement years I'd imagined, now ashes. I thought of the other woman, Lisa, living in a trust-owned house, perhaps just as deceived as I had been. Or perhaps not. "I want what was built with my life," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Not as his wife, as his partner in a fraud I didn't consent to. I want the financial equivalent of the 35 years he stole, and I want it without a noisy, humiliating court battle that will destroy my children. Amanda nodded. "Then we proceed quietly but with immense force. We will file a civil suit outlining the fraud. We will not lead with bigamy, we lead with the financial deception and the secret family. The threat of exposing the bigamy and the potential criminal repercussions will be our leverage. He will settle. He will have to." She drew up the papers. The complaint was a dry, devastating chronology. It listed the Cleveland house, the tuition payments, the vehicles, the secret bank accounts. It attached photographs Martin had provided. Robert pushing a girl on a backyard swing, Robert with his arm around a teenage boy at a soccer game, a happy father, a role he'd played in duplicate. I signed my name, Eleanor Margaret Albright. My maiden name was gone, legally tethered to a man who had no right to give me his. The signature felt like the first true act I'd taken in years. I served him the papers at his office. I didn't do it. A process server did. His call came an hour later. His voice was a choked mix of panic and fury. "Eleanor, what in God's name is this? These lies, this is insane." "Are the children lies, Robert?" I asked, my tone conversational. "Is the marriage license from Nevada a lie?" The silence on the other end was a void. I could hear his breathing, ragged. The mask was off. The performance was over. "You don't understand," he hissed, the charm finally gone, revealing the raw calculus beneath. "It's complicated. I can explain. We can fix this." "There is no we," I said softly. "There hasn't been for a very long time. All communication will go through my attorney, Amanda Cross. I believe you have her details." I hung up. I did not tremble. I felt a profound, eerie calm. The prisoner had finally seen the walls of her cell, and in seeing them, had found the lock. The next few days were a flurry of silent warfare. Robert's lawyer contacted Amanda. Offers were made, pathetic, insulting offers. A lump sum to take care of me, a promise to do right. Amanda, my calm, ferocious champion, rejected them all. The starting point, she told them, is 90% of all assets held in his name, the Cleveland property, and a formal public declaration of the fraud to clear title, or we file the bigamy evidence with the district attorney and go to civil trial. My children called. He had gotten to them first. My son's voice was hurt, confused. "Mom, Dad says you're having a breakdown, that you've hired people to harass him. What's happening?" I had prepared for this. The greatest pain, after Robert's, was this:
dismantling my children's reality. "I am not having a breakdown," I said, each word precise. "I have discovered that your father has been living a double life for over 20 years. He has another wife and 2 other children in Cleveland. He married her before he married me. I have proof. I will send it to you if you wish to see it, but I will not debate my sanity with you. I am clearer now than I have ever been." The silence on his end was a small echo of his father's, then a shattered "What?" I was no longer just fighting for money. I was fighting for my right to my own story, to be believed, to be seen as something other than a discardable part of Robert Albright's logistics. I had spent a lifetime being chosen last, after his career, his secrets, his other family. Now I was choosing myself, not with a shout, but with the silent, irreversible act of signing my name to the truth. The ground was gone, but for the first time, I was not falling. I was building new ground, and I was the architect.
The settlement was finalized in a mediator's office on a Tuesday morning. Robert and I did not speak. He looked 10 years older, shrunken inside his expensive suit. He signed the stacks of documents with a hand that shook slightly. I signed with a hand that was steady. The terms were simple and absolute. The house was mine, free and clear. 90% of all investment accounts, pension funds, and business holdings were transferred to my name. The Cleveland property and its associated trust were to be liquidated, with the proceeds returning to the marital estate, which, legally, meant to me. I was granted a substantial lump sum payment for emotional distress and fraudulent misrepresentation. In return, I agreed not to pursue criminal bigamy charges, and the court records were sealed. Amanda called it one of the most favorable settlements she'd ever seen. It wasn't victory, it was restitution, a financial translation of a stolen life. Telling my children the full story was the true trial. I invited them home, to the house that was now solely mine. I laid out the evidence on the dining table, not to hurt them, but to free us all from the fiction. They saw the marriage license, the photos, the financial trails. My son cried angry tears. My daughter sat in stone-faced silence, then asked, "Did he love us, or was that a performance too?" "I believe he loved you, in his way," I said, which was the most honest and painful answer I could give. But his way was broken, and it cost us all. They have a relationship with him now, but it is strained, careful. They're grappling with their own dual inheritance, the father they knew and the stranger they've discovered. My relationship with them is quieter, more honest. There is less pretense. We are all survivors of the same shipwreck. As for Lisa, the other wife, I never contacted her. I learned, through the legal process, that she believed their marriage was legitimate but troubled, that his frequent absences were for work. She was, in her own way, another victim of his narrative. I instructed Amanda to ensure the settlement allowed her and the children to keep personal effects and provided a small transition fund from Robert's remaining share. It was not my responsibility, but a nod to a shared devastation. Revenge against her would have been misplaced energy. The fault line ran through him, not her. With the legal war over, I was left with the quiet and the money, an astonishing amount of money I had never wanted. I didn't buy a yacht or move to a tropical island. I paid off my children's student loans. I set up education funds for my grandchildren. I established a small scholarship at the local community college for women over 50 returning to education, named it the Clarity Grant. I kept the house, but I changed everything inside. I painted the walls colors Robert hated. I turned his study into a painting studio, a hobby he'd always dismissed. I tore out the perfect manicured rose bushes and planted a wild, chaotic cottage garden. One afternoon, I was in the studio, my hands smudged with cerulean blue, when the doorbell rang. It was Martin Finch, the investigator. He held a small pot of white orchids. "A closing gift," he said, smiling. "I don't usually do this, but yours was a case that stayed with me." I invited him in for tea. We sat in the sunroom, amidst the jungle of my new plants. He told me he was retiring. You were my last client, Mrs. Albright, a good one to end on. Eleanor, I corrected him. He nodded. Eleanor, what will you do now? I looked around the sun-drenched room at the evidence of a life becoming my own. I'm learning, I said. I'm learning what I like when no one is telling me what I should like.
He smiled, a genuine warm thing. That's the best revenge there is. It wasn't revenge, though. Revenge requires a continuing focus on the wrongdoer. This was something else. This was relocation. I had moved my emotional capital out of the bankrupt nation of my marriage and into the sovereign state of myself. Robert lives in a modest apartment. His remaining wealth is a fraction of what it was. His reputation in his business community is, if not ruined, permanently tarnished by the quiet rumors of a messy private matter. He is a ghost in my life. The last time I saw him, by chance at the post office, he looked away quickly. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sorrow, a simple recognition, like seeing a landmark from a train window receding into a past I was no longer traveling toward. The peace of mind I hired Martin to find was not the comfort I expected. It was a stark, unblinking landscape. It is the peace of knowing the exact dimensions of the lie, and therefore the exact boundaries of your own truth. It is the peace of no longer wondering, of no longer auditing your own perceptions against someone else's fiction. I am richer than I ever imagined, not because of the money, but because I finally own my story. All of it. The decades of faithful love were real. My love was real. Their betrayal does not retroactively poison the good moments. It simply frames them in a tragedy I didn't know I was acting in. Now the curtain is up. The set is gone. I am standing on an empty stage in the bright, unforgiving light. And for the first time in 40 years, I am not playing a part. I am simply here. And that is the richest place of all. They say money can't buy happiness. They're right, but it can buy freedom. It can buy safety. It can buy the quiet room where you finally hear your own voice again. And sometimes that is more than enough. Sometimes that is everything.